The atmosphere inside the House chamber crackled with an intensity that made even the most seasoned political observers lean forward in their seats. Speaker Mike Johnson stood elevated at the podium, his distinctive Louisiana drawl slicing through the charged air as his gaze swept across the Democratic side of the aisle with unmistakable disdain. This wasn't going to be just another routine exchange of parliamentary pleasantries. Everyone present could sense it. The tension was coiled, the moment electric. Something consequential was building, and the target was clear. Johnson had been circling this opportunity for weeks, waiting for the perfect opening to publicly put Representative Jasmine Crockett, the outspoken freshman from Texas, back in her place. His tone carried that sharp edge only wielded by those certain of their authority. The kind of slow, deliberate condescension that aims not just to correct, but to humiliate. "The representative from Texas," he announced, each syllable dripping with disdain, "appears to believe she possesses greater comprehension of constitutional principles than those of us who have devoted our entire careers to studying them. Perhaps her energy would be better spent understanding how this institution truly functions, rather than chasing fleeting moments of social media notoriety." It was a calculated ambush, a public reprimand designed to belittle, to strip confidence, to make an example out of someone who dared speak too boldly. A hush fell over parts of the chamber, followed by scattered murmurs. Some members exchanged smirks. Cameras zoomed in. Political journalists knew instantly they were witnessing the spark of a viral moment. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze or offer a nervous smile. Instead, she stood, slow, deliberate, adjusting the microphone with steady, practiced hands. A faint smile curved across her lips, not the nervous grin of someone cornered, but the confident expression of someone who knows precisely what's about to unfold. It was the kind of smile that quietly says, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." What followed over the next few minutes would permanently shift the balance of power in that room. Mike Johnson entered this exchange assuming it would be an easy victory and a symbolic assertion of authority over an audacious newcomer. But what unfolded was nothing short of a strategic dismantling. By the time it was over, even several of his Republican colleagues would later admit privately that challenging Crockett had been a monumental miscalculation. Before we break down exactly what she said that left the Speaker of the House visibly searching for a way out of his own chamber, take a moment to drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You're about to witness what many political analysts have described as one of the most stunning reversals in modern congressional memory. Now, let's talk about Mike Johnson. At 52, Johnson holds the most powerful legislative position in the country outside the presidency, Speaker of the House of Representatives. His career has deep roots in constitutional law, shaped by years working with conservative religious legal groups. Before entering Congress, he spent his professional life litigating cases about religious liberty and traditional values, often championing narrow, literal interpretations of the Constitution. His rise to the speakership wasn't conventional. In the chaos of 2023, after Kevin McCarthy's dramatic removal, a fractured and desperate Republican conference turned to him as a compromise candidate. Johnson had been a relatively obscure figure, serving since 2017 but never chairing a major committee or pushing through landmark legislation. What he lacked in legislative legacy, he made up for with ideological consistency. A devout evangelical, Johnson's conservatism runs through every policy stance he takes: opposition to abortion rights, defense of traditional marriage, and skepticism toward government-led social programs. But once in the Speaker's chair, he struggled to project the authority his title demanded. His razor-thin majority meant constant bargaining with far-right factions and repeated internal challenges to his leadership. He wasn't his party's first choice, and that insecurity lingered like a shadow. At times it showed overcompensation, an eagerness to prove himself, and that same impulse would soon lead him straight into the crosshairs of Jasmine Crockett. Now, let's turn to the woman who found herself on the receiving end of his condescension. By this stage in her career, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another first-term congresswoman. She was a rising national voice. The 43-year-old civil rights attorney from Dallas had already carved out a reputation as a fearless interrogator and skilled debater. She'd gone viral dismantling Nancy Mace with documentation in hand, publicly questioning Mitch McConnell's fitness, and repeatedly proving she had both the intellect and fire to stand her ground. Her power came not from theatrics, but from training. Before politics, Crockett spent over 15 years as a trial lawyer, mastering the art of cross-examination, constructing airtight arguments, and speaking truth to power in courtrooms where the stakes were life and liberty. She'd fought civil rights battles, argued First Amendment cases, and defended clients against government abuse. When she entered Congress, she brought that same courtroom precision with her. Crockett represents Texas's 30th District, a vibrant, working-class stretch of Dallas defined by diversity, resilience, and struggle. Her constituents are predominantly Black and Latino families who've long faced systemic inequities in healthcare, housing, and voting rights. She came to Congress not to play by the unwritten rules of seniority, but to fight for the communities that raised her. And she'd already proven she had the skill and conviction to do just that. The confrontation that changed everything came during debate on a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. It was one of those high-stakes moments where failure to act could trigger a shutdown. The Republican proposal on the table included deep cuts to social programs, rollbacks of reproductive rights funding, and other measures Democrats viewed as political bait. Crockett had taken the floor to oppose it, speaking with calm precision about the real-world harm the cuts would cause. Her delivery was surgical, citing provisions, quoting data, and framing the issue not in abstract terms, but in human consequences. It was an effective speech. Too effective. Republicans were watching her gain traction, not just in the room, but on camera. And Johnson decided to intervene. He didn't use parliamentary procedure. He used power. The chamber was packed that afternoon. Every seat filled, C-SPAN cameras rolling, reporters ready to clip, quote, and tweet. What was about to unfold was bigger than a funding bill. It was about hierarchy, voice, and who gets to speak without being put back in their place. Inside his own caucus, Johnson had been under pressure from the far right, told he needed to fight harder and show strength. So when Crockett's speech gained momentum, he seized his moment. To him, this was political theater, a way to project dominance, to prove his authority. But for Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't theater. It was personal. She'd been here before, dismissed, patronized, interrupted, and she understood exactly what was at stake. Because Johnson wasn't just attacking her, he was attacking what she represented. A Black woman from Texas, a civil rights lawyer who'd fought her way to Congress to speak for people who'd been ignored. She wasn't going to let that pass. Not now. Not ever. Jasmine Crockett had been properly recognized to speak on the continuing resolution. She stood on the Democratic side of the chamber, her posture steady, her tone professional yet firm, as she began her remarks. "Madam Speaker," she said, voice resonant across the floor, "I rise in opposition to this continuing resolution because it represents a fundamental betrayal of the American families who depend on their government to keep its promises. While this legislation is being marketed as fiscally responsible governance, what it actually accomplishes is gutting programs that millions of our citizens rely on for basic necessities." She held up the thick document containing the bill's text. Page 47 contains cuts to WIC, the Nutritional Assistance Program serving low-income pregnant women and young children. Page 63 reduces Medicaid funding, which will force states to slash healthcare services for their most vulnerable populations. Page 89 imposes restrictions on Title's family planning that will shutter clinics in underserved communities across this nation. Republican members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Having the specific provisions of their legislation read aloud in plain language made it harder to hide behind abstract rhetoric about fiscal responsibility. But what troubles me most deeply, Crockett continued, is the profound hypocrisy embedded in this approach. Many of the members supporting this bill represent districts that benefit enormously from federal spending. They speak passionately about cutting government programs, yet they fight ferociously to protect military installations and agricultural subsidies in their own constituencies. She was landing blows and Republicans felt it. Johnson, presiding as Speaker, leaned toward his microphone with a warning. The gentlewoman will confine her remarks to the legislation's substance and refrain from characterizing the motivations of fellow members. But Crockett, experienced attorney that she was, knew the rules probably better than Johnson himself. "Mr. Speaker," she responded smoothly, "I am addressing the legislation substance. I am reading directly from the text and discussing its policy implications." Emboldened, Crockett pressed forward with even greater force. According to Congressional Budget Office analysis, the tax provisions in this legislation will save corporations over $40 billion while cutting $28 billion from social programs. We are literally transferring resources from poor families to corporations that are already recording record profits. A Republican member suddenly shouted, "Point of order!" "Mr. Speaker, this was a serious parliamentary challenge." Johnson paused, visibly weighing his options. The chair will review the gentlewoman's remarks, Johnson said carefully. The gentlewoman may continue, but she must refrain from imputing motivations and confine herself to policy discussion. It was a compromise ruling, but it created the opening for what came next, Johnson's catastrophic mistake. Crockett wasn't backing down. Now, I've served in Congress for less than 2 years, but I spent more than 15 years as a civil rights attorney before arriving here, so when I examine this bill and conclude that it prioritizes corporate interests over working families, that assessment isn't a partisan attack. It's a professional evaluation based on the actual legislative text. And I would encourage all members to actually read this legislation because I suspect some members voting for it haven't actually examined what's contained in these pages. That was Johnson's breaking point. He interrupted her, which speakers rarely do when a member has been properly recognized to speak. The gentlewoman will suspend. Johnson leaned forward and his frustration was written across his face. The chair would remind the gentlewoman that while she may possess experience as an attorney, this is the United States Congress, not a courtroom. The traditions and procedures of this institution have been established over 230 years, and they deserve respect. But Johnson wasn't finished, and this is where he made his catastrophic error. The gentlewoman from Texas seems to think she knows more about constitutional law than those of us who actually studied it. Perhaps she should spend less time creating viral moments and more time learning how government actually works. This isn't social media, Congresswoman. This is the people's house, and it requires a level of understanding and decorum that I'm not sure the gentlewoman has fully grasped yet. The chamber went absolutely silent. Democrats looked shocked. Even some Republicans appeared visibly uncomfortable. Johnson had crossed far beyond procedural guidance into personal attack territory. He had questioned her credentials, dismissed her extensive legal experience, and suggested she didn't understand how government functions. It was insulting, condescending, and catastrophic, because he had just personally attacked a civil rights attorney and constitutional law expert in precisely the area where she was. In fact, significantly more qualified than he was. Jasmine Crockett stood there for a long moment, letting his words hang in the air. Then she smiled. "Mr. Speaker," she said calmly, "I would like to respond to your characterization of my credentials. May I continue with my allotted time?" Johnson realized too late that he had walked directly into a trap. "The gentlewoman may proceed," he said. But his voice had lost its earlier certainty. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she began. "You just questioned my understanding of constitutional law and suggested I should spend less time on social media and more time learning how government works. So let me respond to that assessment. You mentioned that you studied constitutional law. So, let's have a frank discussion about our respective qualifications. You graduated from Louisiana State University's Paul M. Hirt Law School in 1998, a perfectly respectable institution. Following graduation, you worked for Alliance Defending Freedom, a religious conservative legal organization. That's legitimate legal work. I graduated from the University of Houston Law Center. I then spent 15 years as a practicing civil rights attorney. I have argued cases involving First Amendment rights, 14th Amendment equal protection principles, 4th Amendment protections against unreasonable searches, and 5th Amendment due process guarantees. She began enumerating specific cases. I have represented clients in federal district courts, state courts, and appellate courts. I have won cases that established precedents in Texas jurisprudence. I have defended individuals against unconstitutional police searches, discriminatory employment practices, and violations of voting rights. The chamber was completely silent. So, with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to practical application of constitutional law, not merely theoretical study, due to actual courtroom experience defending constitutional rights, I am thoroughly qualified. In fact, my hands-on experience is substantially more extensive than yours. Several Democrats nodded. A few Republicans looked down at their desks, but Crockett wasn't finished. You mentioned that this institution has 230 years of tradition and procedure. That's absolutely correct. But since you brought up constitutional law, let's discuss it properly. She held up a pocket constitution. Article 1, Section 5. Grants each House of Congress the power to establish its own rules. However, those rules must still comply with the Constitution itself, particularly the First Amendment's protections. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, including political speech. As a member of Congress, I possess not merely the right, but the constitutional duty to speak about legislation and its impacts. You as Speaker have the authority to enforce House rules, but you do not possess the authority to silence members simply because you disagree with their arguments or find them politically inconvenient. Several Democrats began nodding vigorously. When you interrupted me to suggest I don't understand how government works, you weren't enforcing a house rule. You were attempting to intimidate me into silence. That's not neutral presiding. That's silencing dissent. Then she shifted to an even more personal level. You also accused me of being more interested in social media than substance. Let's address that claim. Yes, my speeches sometimes go viral. Do you know why? Because I speak clearly about how legislation affects real human beings. I don't hide behind jargon and procedure. I explain what bills actually do. This legislation cuts $28 billion from social programs. When I state that fact and it gets shared widely, that's not performance. That's transparency. Perhaps if more members explained their votes in plain English, Americans would have greater faith in this institution. And as for learning how government works, I would point out that you've been Speaker for less than 1 year. You've struggled to pass basic legislation. You've faced multiple rebellions from your own conference. You've had to rely on democratic votes to avoid shutdowns. Her words cut like surgical instruments. So perhaps before questioning whether I understand how government functions, you should reflect on whether your leadership approach is actually proving effective. The Republican side sat in stone silence, but Crockett had saved her most devastating observation for last. Mr. Speaker, there's one additional matter I need to address. You have now attacked my credentials, questioned my motives, and suggested I don't understand government. This is not the first time a young woman of color in Congress has faced this particular brand of dismissiveness. We have witnessed it directed at Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Omar, Congresswoman Bush, and numerous others. She leaned into her microphone. There appears to be a consistent pattern. When women of color speak passionately about policy, we are told we're too emotional, too focused on attention, not serious enough. But when white men speak with identical passion, they're characterized as principled and strong. The room was electric. I want to be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker. I am not too emotional. I am not unqualified. I am not here to generate viral moments for their own sake. I am here because the citizens of Texas's 30th District elected me to represent their interests, and I will continue to speak for them loudly, clearly, and persistently, whether you or anyone else finds that convenient or comfortable. She paused, then delivered her final devastating line. Now, if you would like to engage in an actual debate about constitutional law, I am fully prepared. But if you're simply going to abuse your position as Speaker to silence members who challenge your party's agenda, then you're not upholding this House's traditions. You're betraying them. And no amount of procedural authority or appeals to decorum can disguise that fundamental truth. The room was frozen, completely frozen. Democrats sat stunned. Republicans didn't know how to react. And Mike Johnson sat motionless in the Speaker's chair, his face a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and shock. He had entered this confrontation, confident he would put Crockett in her place. Instead, she had just systematically dismantled him before the entire Congress and a national audience. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words emerged. Finally, he simply said, "The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California." He moved on, refusing to engage further because what could he possibly say? She had out-argued him on constitutional law, exposed his double standards, called out his abuse of authority, all while maintaining perfect decorum. Jasmine Crockett gathered her materials and sat down, her expression composed. She had said exactly what needed to be said, and everyone knew they had just witnessed something historic. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. Before Crockett had even taken her seat, clips were spreading across every platform. Within minutes, hashtags exploded. Jasmine Crockett constitutional lesson. Receipt queen. Every major outlet covered it. CNN ran fireworks erupt as Speaker Johnson clashes with Rat Crockett. Texas Democrat delivers devastating response. MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell said, "This wasn't merely political. It was educational." Crockett demonstrated that expertise matters. Credentials matter. And when you attack someone on substance, you'd better be prepared for response with even greater substance. Johnson's office went into crisis mode, releasing weak statements that social media demolished. Johnson himself tried downplaying it, but when pressed about regretting his attack, he deflected awkwardly, which only made things worse. Democratic leadership praised Crockett effusively. Republicans were publicly divided but privately frustrated. The confrontation fundamentally changed Johnson's approach to presiding. He became noticeably more cautious, less likely to make editorial comments from the chair. For Crockett, the moment catapulted her to even higher prominence. Her fundraising surged over $3 million in 1 week. She received more prominent committee assignments, became one of the most sought-after media voices, and transformed from politically well-known to a genuine household name. Young attorneys, particularly women of color, reached out, expressing how her example inspired them. She became a symbol of using expertise to fight for justice. The broader implications were significant. It demonstrated expertise still matters. Crockett won because she genuinely knew constitutional law better than Johnson. It illustrated the danger of making conflicts personal. Johnson's error was attacking credentials rather than policy. It showed old congressional difference. Rules are crumbling. Younger members reject automatic deference to seniority. The power of preparation was evident. Crockett succeeded because she was comprehensively ready, and social media proved its role as an equalizer. Johnson's formal authority couldn't overcome Crockett's viral moment. Months later, it continues being referenced. Don't pull a Mike Johnson became shorthand for don't attack someone in their area of expertise. Johnson remained speaker, but diminished. Crockett continues with the same fire and intelligence, having proven she belongs and won't be silenced. Johnson now treats her with careful formality, never again attempting to question her credentials because he learned the hard way that when you come for Jasmine Crockett, you better be prepared for her to come back twice as hard. And Shielways has the receipts. What did you think of this showdown? Did Johnson cross a line or was her response too harsh? Drop your opinion in the comments. If this left you speechless, subscribe for more explosive political analysis. Like if you think Crockett is one of Congress's most effective members, and share with someone who needs to see what genuine expertise looks like defending itself. Comment your dream constitutional law debate matchup. Crockett versus who? Here's the lesson. Never let anyone make you doubt your expertise when you know you're qualified. Crockett showed us the best response to credential questioning isn't anger. It's calmly demonstrating competence. 5 takeaways. Master your field so thoroughly nobody can question your expertise. Never be intimidated by titles. Crockett didn't care about Johnson's position. When challenged, compare qualifications directly. Maintain composure under attack. Emotional control makes arguments more powerful. Call out double standards and systemic patterns. The world needs more people willing to stand up to authority when it's exercised unjustly, whether in workplace meetings, courtrooms, classrooms, or Congress. Remember, expertise combined with truth will always be more powerful than titles combined with empty authority. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next explosive political moment. Analysis. Democracy works best when citizens know what's actually happening. Not partisan filtered versions, but full context and real stakes. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop demanding accountability from those wielding power in your name. We'll see you in the next